Harrelson. So Davis has been with Asterix for several years now. He has extensive experience in the LIMS market, and prior to joining Asterix, he spent 5 years with PerkinElmer, actually doing implementations, configurations, etc. Davis was a former lab manager, so he knows the sciences as well as the technology, and does bring over 15 years of experience as a LabWorks user as well as an implementer. So with that said, no further ado, I'd like to introduce Davis Harrelson.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. Again, good to be with you today in this second installment of our webinar series. I just want to quickly go over the agenda of what we're going to be discussing today. First, a little bit of reporting 101 as it relates to LabWorks, just some general reporting techniques and considerations that you need to have. We're going to get into a good bit of Crystal reports today, so I'm going to give you an overview of the Crystal reporting process. And then the meat of the seminar is going to be really looking at 5 specific LabWorks reports. A chain of custody report, a final result with attached QC, a monthly average compliance report, a graphing and a charting report, and then a data summary with accounting feature type report. And really what I want you guys to really take note of is I'm going to be kind of looking at these reports 2 different ways. I want you to look at the final report and its completion for its own merit, but then I'm going to be illustrating in live demos some of these technical features such as crosstabs, sub-reports, grouping, sorting features, filtering, etc. I'm going to be illustrating those live to kind of reinforce how these reports are developed. So just keep that in mind. So if you're an expert on Crystal reports, really you might want to look at the reports from a 30,000-foot level. If you're a beginner, you may want to take more note on how some of these technical aspects are being generated. And of course, at the very end, we'll take your questions and kind of go from there. So before we get really into it, I think we've got a poll question in terms of trying to gauge you guys' familiarity with LabWorks reporting. So Rob, you want to take it over?
Yeah, first poll question today. We're going to have several of these throughout the next hour. I'd like to gauge your experience in developing LabWorks reports. So please make one of the choices there. And what we're going to use this for is this will allow Davis to kind of dial in the different areas to the audience. So no right or wrong answer. But if you take a second, go ahead and make your selection, and then we'll move on. Okay, the results are coming in now. We'll give it another few seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll, and here are the results that we could take a quick look at. Well, I think this is good. I mean, we've got a broad spectrum here, a lot of beginners and intermediates, so I think you're going to certainly get a lot out of it. And even for those of you that are experts, Davis is going to touch on some of the more detailed aspects of some of these reports that hope to give you some insights and some tips and tricks. So with that done, Davis, it's all yours.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, that's good because I tried to write this presentation geared to the kind of the intermediate, so we got a majority of there, so that's going to be good going forward. So, reporting 101. Let's start by really talking about what a report is. And many of us think of reports as like something that we just spill out to the printer and look at it and sign it and mail it off. But that's really too much of a simplistic definition of reports. Reports really involves querying your database, extracting the data from your database, exporting it, aggregating it, sorting it, formatting, and then displaying it in a format that's going to be really, really beneficial to you or your users. So when you look at this broad report definition, you really just can't look at it in terms of paper. You really need to look at it in what format is your users going to need it, and it may be an electronic means or it may be otherwise. So just keep that in mind as we kind of skip through these reports. In LabWorks, typically your data sources are from one of 2 ways, really. The first would be a data export type report where you're actually exporting the data from LabWorks and then reporting it from that exported set of data. You may want to keep in mind that this can also consider third-party systems. You don't necessarily just have to query LabWorks. You can query LabWorks in combination with other third-party systems that you may have at your organization to get the data that you need. The second one being a direct connect to the database. This is one that requires a little bit more advanced skill sets. You're not really exporting it from LabWorks, but based on your knowledge of the LabWorks tables, whether you have Oracle or SQL Server, for example, you're querying those databases directly to pull data out that you need to report. Again, you can also direct connect to third-party databases as well. And then, I guess most popularly are hybrid reports. They're both export and direct connect type of reports. When you report out of LabWorks, most all of your database fields are exportable, but some data remains in the tables that you have to direct connect. So really a combination or a hybrid report of those two really makes your report generation the most powerful. And then the fourth type is what we're not getting in today, is a web-compatible SIMC report. It's an XML-based report that's used for the LabWorks web module. We can cover that in a separate seminar. So when we talk about output options, as I was mentioning earlier, paper being the most traditional, but we can also automate that paper, maybe attach it as a PDF and automatically email it. Another popular output option for reports is again, it's not really what you consider to be a final report. It's an intermediate step. Let's say you want to export, you want your final data to reside in Excel. A lot of the reporting tools in LabWorks can be used as an intermediary to export that data to Excel or other type of programs. Your output could be a web or an HTML type page for display. It can also be an intermediate for electronic data delivery formats. Let's say you're sending data to state or federal regulatory programs. Let's say you're sending data to third-party systems, maybe another database or another internal system in your organization. LabWorks reporting can be used to generate that as well. And then, of course, once we generate that report, your display options are endless. Put it on a printer, put it on a PC, put it on a phone, tablet, you name it. Those display options are wide open. So we're going to talk a little bit about Crystal here. And really, as I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of tailoring this to the intermediate user. If you're new to Crystal, you're going to get some good design techniques here. If you're already an expert on it, maybe just look at the reports in its final state, maybe get some ideas of something that you can use in your organization. I'm going to go through this pretty fast. I mean, I'll probably spend 2 minutes on each report, and you could easily spend 2 hours on that report. So I really urge you not necessarily to try to look at this and say, try to remember where did he click there or did he click here. Kind of look at this from a broad scale and really look at it globally what I'm trying to do with these reports. And as Rob mentioned, these seminars are being recorded and it's all going to be available to you after the fact. So if you kind of want to go back and try to remember what did I do here, you can always get the webinar and go back and replay it. So I'll go through this in depth with the demo, but Crystal report generation really is pretty simple if you've never done it. On your reports menu on your LabWorks desktop, you have a Crystal report setup sub-item. If you click the Crystal report setup item, you get the report designer screen that allows you to select one of 3 type reports: your data export report, your XML web-based report, or your data direct report. And we're going to be talking about data export and data direct type reports today. You select your existing report, or you type in the name of a new report. Then you get sent to the sample selection screen, which is quite familiar with you guys in LabWorks. It's basically the screen where you can choose a criteria to select your samples that you want on your report. And then you simply load the report, and it shows up in the designer view. And you can either proceed to design your new report or modify your existing reports. And I'll show this here a good bit here shortly. So why do we want to do Crystal? It's really the most powerful tool within LabWorks to group, sort, filter, use as this intermediary to export or format data, and display that data in those customized formats. As LabWorks users, I mean, we can think about some of the reporting options that have been at our disposal. We can think of Word reports. We can think of Access reports. In some cases, we can think of the MOR type reports or simply like exporting data to Excel. But Crystal is indeed the best way within LabWorks to orient and format that data in an output that can best be utilized in your laboratory. And as you'll see, and as you know, dealing with crystals, this does come at a cost. You have to be somewhat trained in crystal. It's not really that intuitive to design a report off the bat, but with a little bit of experimentation and playing around, you guys can become experts in no time. We do this webinar a year from now, 50% of you will be experts easily. So let's start looking at some of these LabWorks reports. The first report I want to really demonstrate is a chain of custody report. You can get a nice little graphic view of it on the right-hand side of the screen there. These are historically manually generated or handwritten. This is usually the primary step in sample management, and largely it's the most important step, arguably, in sample management. This, again, is usually handwritten. You see chain of custodies across all markets. It really doesn't matter what market you're in. A typical type of chain of custody report is usually necessary. It's really optimally designed using the crosstab feature within Crystal. And then within the LabWorks application itself, you can combine this report with auto generation and or like label printing for like an efficient field kit package that you can kind of carry into the field with you, with maybe a set of labels and a chain of custody to collect samples. And this whole thing can be integrated with Process Scheduler that we can also discuss in a separate webinar. So I'm going to launch, I have my LabWorks desktop screen open, and I'm going to launch the Crystal Report Designer here. So bear with me. We've got technology at work here. We're kind of bouncing back and forth between a live application and PowerPoint. So we hope this goes off without a hitch, but we'll go from there. So once I launch my Crystal Report Designer, here's my report design screen where I select the type of report that I'm going to modify. In this particular case, I'm selecting the data export report, and I'm picking my chain of custody report. And I will not do this, but I will show you this particular step starting out. If I hit this Edit Export Format button, this displays all of the LabWorks fields that are available to you to export to this report. It does not mean you have to use those fields in the report. However, if you do not select your samples on this screen, by double-clicking it and moving it to the right-hand side of the screen, your report will not have these fields available. So it's a good opportunity initially when you design a report to go ahead and click and drag all of these fields on this screen that you think you're going to need for this particular report design, and you'll be done with it. In this particular case, I've already designed this report. These fields are what I need, so I don't have to make any changes to this Edit Export Format. So I select my report, I click Next, I get to my sample selection screen. There are multiple ways to select samples in LabWorks depending on your application. Obviously, you may need one versus the other. In my particular case, just for this demonstration, I'm going to run a cross-reference search to select samples. Cross-reference search, as you're probably familiar with, is basically the generic query tool within LabWorks to search. I'm going to run a cross-reference search that prompts me for a date range. So I'm simply going to run a cross-reference search that encompasses really 1 day just to pull in a good set of samples that would go on a chain of custody. Select my collection date. It found 70 samples. I can view those selections. Matter of fact, I'll probably just reduce this down a little bit just so it'll be easier to view a report. I'll probably just pick the first 10 samples of those 70 that I selected, and I'll enter those selections. And this will be the good time to play Jeopardy music, as we know, waiting for things to happen in LabWorks. But hey, this goes pretty quickly. My report is up, and you can see here that the initial screen is in my design mode for my chain of custody report. For this first report, I'll kind of tailor this to your beginners. I'll just kind of give you the layout here in this Crystal report. You have 2 tabs at the top, your design view and your preview tab. Your preview tab really shows the report in its final version as you're looking at it on the screen here. You can toggle right back to the design tab to change elements of the design. If you see the report layout, you typically have a report header, a page header, a detail section, a report footer, and a page footer. All of these elements really are involved in the Crystal report design process. And try to make it really simple, really what you do is you click and you drag fields in the area of the report that you want it to display on the Crystal report. So for example, this laboratory chain of custody header record here, logo, comments, etc., I want this to appear in every page of the report. So I'm simply going to drag my items onto this section of the report for it to appear there. Now, what do I drag? Within the database field selection, I have a couple of tables here. My flat data table set is the table set that got exported from LabWorks. Those were the fields that I selected on the Edit Export Format screen in launching the report. This is one of the most confusing questions that customers ask, and I don't have a good answer for it, but right off the bat, you see these little 4-letter or longer acronyms that are associated with the field names. These are acronyms that are associated with the export fields that you picked on that first screen. There's no good way to really know these. Instead, you just have to memorize it for what they are. A code being analysis code, A name being analysis name, anal being analyte, CDAT being collection date, collection time, and so on. US01 or your specific user-defined fields for your specific application. It could go US01 all the way to US50. So simply designing this report, you just click and drag these fields onto the report canvas where you want it to display, and then it will subsequently appear in your preview for your final report. In this particular report, I've got a hybrid report. I not only have an export type report, I'm actually direct connecting to the database to hook up with the bottle list table and the analytes table. I needed to do that to make the functionality on this report work the way I want it. So in order to do that, I have to go right click on the database field section and go set data source location. And when you do that, you can see your current connections that you have. In this particular case, I'm connecting to the flat data through my export file, and I'm connecting through my analytes and bottle list table through my direct connection. If I wanted to make a new connection to my database, I could come down to the bottom of the screen and create that new connection here. I'm not going to do that for this particular webinar, but I did want you to be aware that underneath this set data source location controls how you connect to either LabWorks databases or third-party databases. So let's look at this report and see kind of what's making this laboratory chain of custody tick. Really, I've got my header information at the top, and I've got my footer information at the bottom where I have all my signatures and so forth. But really what makes this thing hum is the center part of the chain of custody report. This is designed using a crosstab feature. Here you can see in the crosstab feature, we have different fields that we can put in rows, and we have different fields here that we can put in columns. So really in a crosstab, you're essentially going through a wizard and you're telling LabWorks what you want in rows and what you want in columns. How does this look in design mode? I have my crosstab here. Again, you can see the preview mode is a little bit ugly, but if you kind of design mode, excuse me, but if you compare that to the preview mode, you can kind of see what's going on here and see where your fields are located. If I highlight this crosstab item and I right-click and do crosstab expert, this actually gets me within the wizard of the crosstab where I can define what I want in my rows, what I want in my columns, and what I want to be summarized within the main body of the chain of custody. Here in my rows, I want my sample description, I want my user-defined field number 2 field, I want my sample ID number, I want another user-defined field in my system, and then I want the sample description again. You can see these are all displayed in the row formats. If I want to add another one, I just simply come here, select the field that I want, drag it underneath the row item, and I've added that particular field within my crosstab. I can click on the arrow to remove it. In my columns, I want my bottle list bottle code. This is helping me out in my chain of custody to actually determine what analysis are coming out of certain bottles to help me orient my chain of custody the way I want it. I also want my analysis code to be displayed across the column, and I also have this formula field called preservative, what I call preserve or preservative here on the crosstab. So if I look at the preview here, there are my rows of data that I added within the crosstab. Here are my columns of data. You can see my analysis codes here, and here you can see my preservative codes that I'm using. It's AAAS. You notice it corresponds to a legend here at the bottom for my preservative codes. These are actually preservative added to the sample that's required to receive them. So how did I actually make that AAAF work? If I go back to the design function and I go to my formula fields, I have a formula here called preservative or preserve. If I right-click on that preservative formula field and I click edit, here you can actually see that I've added individual basic syntax code to my crystal report to make things happen. So I've got a bunch of logic in this report that says, hey, if my bottle code is at algae, then I want a formula for H that corresponds to my preservative. If my bottle code is at ions, I want a formula code for A, and so forth. So by adding a little bit of logic in the report, I can come back in here and make a particular custom functionality of automatically displaying the preservative of my bottle types on my crystal report. So the only other thing I want to show you here as it relates to the crosstab itself is notice here I've got X identifiers to where we're actually submitting this particular sample for this particular analysis. If you look at that particular section in the design criteria, you can see that is my actual summary field there. If I right-click on that and I hit Format Field, you can see that I've got a little red indicator by this little code button here. In Crystal, you can put snippets of Crystal syntax or basic syntax code behind any type of field. And if you can do that, it'll customize this particular display. So I want to customize the display of this particular field. So if I click within that editor, you can see that I've added a little bit of code there that says if the current field value is greater than 0, then formula equals X. What that means is that summary of that particular field has a positive value, meaning that that's an analysis ordered for that sample, which would be greater than 0, then I want to put an X in that to display in that box to indicate I want that particular analysis ordered. So that gives you a little just brief example of how that particular functionality is working. The only other thing I want to show you here as it relates to this crystal report, as you know that if you populate data on this particular report, you can have many different analysis codes across the top and many different rows of data along the bottom. Rows of data along the bottom is no big deal. Your crystal report is just simply going to continue on to the second page. But if you have rows going across the top, it extends into what's called a virtual page. Crystal reports can easily handle virtual pages, objects that flow over into another page, and can create its own page itself. But what you have to remember when you're designing these objects, for example, is let's say that you know you're going to design a report that's going to spill over this page. You have to take each object, and here I'm using this lab-only object, and I'm going to format it, and I'm going to check this repeat on horizontal pages. So what will happen is if I add a data set that's really, really big and it spills over into another page, all of my formatting for my report is going to continue on into that second page. So again, 2 minutes worth of something that could easily take 2 hours, but I really wanted to show you the final version of this report to get you some ideas of how chain of custody might work in your laboratory and really give you some just snippets of quick information of things that could help you maybe design this crystal report. In subsequent webinars, we can certainly do tips and tricks where we kind of design these things from scratch. So, chain of custody conclusions. Use the crosstab design features to orient your layout in desired row column formats. Remember those virtual pages if you have data sets that spill over to other pages. Use LabWorks bottle codes to handle container situations where maybe you have certain analysis coming out of certain bottles. And then from a managerial perspective, don't just think about necessarily a crosstab and chain of custody. Think about how a crosstab functionality can really be extended to other managerial reports and designs in your laboratory. Maybe crosstabs can help you with other type of managerial summaries that can be used as well. So, and a little final tip, when you do crosstab objects in Crystal, always place them in the report header or footer area. If you don't, the report's not going to work. So, and if you notice on my report where I was generating, I had it in the report footer area, so always put them there, and you'll be good to go. Second report is a final result in QC. Reporting QC has always been a challenge in LabWorks. One of the primary questions that I get from all users is, how do I put my QC on my report? Well, this can be optimally designed using the sub-report feature within Crystal. You can do this to design regular type reports for those of you in the environmental arena, like NELAC type reports where you have to have data qualifiers, you have to have QC summary sections, etc. Use the sub-report feature to do that. So I'm going to demo a final customer report with QC attached here. In this demo, again, I'm doing a data export report. I'm doing a standard QA6 comment report. I'm going to, in my edit export format, one tip I want to show you here, under the export options tab, always have the export QA QC data checkbox checked. That's going to export all of your QC associated with your samples to that report. So always have that checked. I'm going to go to my sample selection. I'm going to run a cross-reference search. In this particular case, I'm going to run a cross-reference search that prompts me for a location and a date. And load this report. Play elevator music or whistle the Jeopardy tune while your reports are loading. And here I have just a very simplistic final report with QC. One thing pops up here right off the bat is another item that I want to illustrate, is the idea of parameter fields. Parameter fields can be added to be generated at runtime. So let's say, for example, when you're generating the report, maybe there is a selection of data that you quite or do not know what needs to go on the report until you actually run the report. Parameter fields allows you to make that happen. So here I have a list of project names for this particular sample set. I'm going to give it a project name called Casual Creation. Select the right-hand arrow to pull that over into the selected value. Click OK, and then my report generates with that parameter field. If I go to my Preview tab, you can see here in this project name, this Casual Creations entry that I selected got populated on that report based on the design. So again, parameter fields are very, very powerful to allow you to add data at runtime that you may not know exists, or you can actually use it at runtime to filter your data. Let's say you had a parameter field where you only wanted to display one or more analysis codes on the report, and it changed every time you generated the report. You could use the parameter field for the same type of function. But as it relates to this design, as I kind of scroll through this report, you can simply see that there's really nothing fancy about this report. It's something probably very similar that you guys have in your laboratory. It's just a summary report based on sample ID, based on the sample point. It's got the analysis results, date, time analyzed. Nothing really special here, except when we get to the second to the last page of the report. The way I have this report designed is all QC associated with the samples that were actually being reported are summarized in the final page of the report. So here you can see my batch name is out 2061. It's got my QA sample ID, the QA sample ID of all of my samples that I added to the batch. And it's got a listing of all the samples that are in the batch that are associated with that particular sample ID. And it's got the QC information here summarized. My primary result, my duplicate result, and maybe my precision calculation, and so forth. So this is done on the last page of this report, kind of like as an attachment. So how does this work? How does this happen? Using the sub-report feature. If I come back to the design mode of my report, and I scroll all the way down to the bottom, and again, I've got a page header, I've got a detail section, I've got page footers, but in my report footer, I have this sub-report. I've added a sub-report. I have right-clicked, and I have hit Insert, Sub-report, and I've created a new sub-report in this particular main report. If I double-click on the report, it actually sends me to the sub-report design itself. And notice what I have. I have two tabs here. I have a main report and I have a sub-report. And I can toggle back and forth between the two to change my design. If I look at my sub-report section here, you can see that all of my QA, QC data got exported here, and I can simply drag and drop my QC fields on this sub-report section to make my connection happen. What's nice about exporting QC from LabWorks is all of your relationships between these tables are already done, so I don't have to do any kind of complex linkages or anything to make that happen. The sub-report feature does it for me. The final key item I wanted to show on this report is the idea of suppressing or only displaying data when data exists. If you notice here, I've got this part of my report here, but I've got sections that can actually incorporate an analysis comment. I'm not sure how well you can see it on your screen, but they're kind of grayed out on my report here. I have code behind this particular field. So if I highlight the field, right-click, and do Format Text, notice here in my suppression selection, I have code written behind this particular selection. And basically, I can say suppress or hide this field if no data is present. My comment's located in a field called blob data. So basically, I'm saying if the blob data is empty, don't show the comment. It's as simple as that. And when I do that, if there's no comment present on my report, it's not going to show up here. If a comment was present, that entire string of text would show up on this report. So just another little tip there for you to internalize on this one. So again, final report with QC, pretty common request, handled with the sub-report functionality. So use those sub-reports to create sections that are associated with the main report. Use parameter fields to easily add variable data at report runtime. Use logic to only display objects where conditions exist. And then think about how that sub-report functionality can be extended to maybe other managerial reports and designs in your laboratory. And again, the main take-home tip here is use those sub-reports to associate QC samples with analytical batch samples. Monthly average compliance report. This is one that illustrates summarizing and calculating variables from various data sets. It's a very popular feature in Crystal. It can be optimally designed using the summarization feature within Crystal. Use this strategy to design reports that may have permit limits or compliance considerations. And let me fire up this report to show you how this one looks like. Pick the report, run a cross-reference search. This is a very popular compliance report. This is an example of an industrial discharge compliance summary where basically you have summarization of data that you've collected throughout the course of the month. So here, for example, I've got a 3-day sample set where I've collected things such as BOD, total suspended solids, chemical oxygen demand, etc. And here are results that I obtained during those 3 days of sampling. But here's my monthly average calculated within the report itself within Crystal. This is done utilizing a running total field. Edit running total field. Basically what I'm telling the report to do is take a field and average that field and reset it every time the analysis code changes. So an average every time the analysis code changes. So again, if I look back at my preview tab, I've got a 3-day sample set here. That running total is taking the average of this 3-day sample set. Now, one caution here within LabWorks. Your primary result field in LabWorks in your database is a text field, natively a text field. So if you go to do mathematical calculations of your functions within Crystal, you're not going to be able to do it as it's exported, again, because it's a text field. So what I actually had to do to make this particular report work is I actually had to create a formula called val, or value, basically saying that if the value of my flatdata.acom, which is a text field, if it equals 0, which it would be if it is a text field, then use the MDL value for my calculation. So in this particular program, if I have a less than entry in my result field, or if I have a non-numeric text value in my result field, I want to use the MDL in the calculation. Otherwise, take the value of that text field. This particular formula converts it into a numeric function, and then subsequently you can use it within your calculation. The final thing I want to show you here in this particular report is the idea of conditional highlighting. Notice here as I scroll down to the bottom of this report, I have an oil and grease value here that was 138 milligrams per liter with a permit limit of 100. This particular numeric value exceeded my permit limitation, and I wanted to flag this particular cell. I wanted to color the background silver in order to make this kind of violation stand out or highlight. How did I do this? Well, if I want to make a change to this field, I actually go back to it within the design mode. So if I select the actual result field in my design mode, right-click, and do Format Field, notice how in my border section, I have code by the background area of the format editor, the background font or the background color. And if I click the code within that, you can see that I have some logic in this particular formula that says if my violation code equals upper spec or violation code equals lower spec, meaning I have a violation, then I want the background of this cell to be silver, as indicated right there. If it's no violation, I want it to have no color. So that's simply how I'm making my conditional highlighting happen. There are other ways within Crystal to do it, but I found that to be the easiest way to make different cells highlight within this particular report. But anyway, good industrial discharge summary report. You're summarizing data, you're calculating data, you are calculating permit limits based on a particular site, and doing some conditional highlighting to make the report hum. So the insert summary feature can perform those basic summary calculations. You can sort and group feature to display data the way you want it, and then you can add logic to format those results in a special font that may be in and out of spec, bold, red, etc.
Before we go on to the graph and chart, Davis, let's have our second poll of the day. As you had mentioned earlier, we always see that, and we've always hear that that reporting is some of the most challenging things that our clients face. So if you go ahead and make a selection here, you can select more than one. Give us an indication of if you're having issues with creating reports, where they lie. I'll give you a few seconds to go ahead and make your selections. All right, people just about finishing up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and take a look at the results. I guess not surprising that it's in designing some of the complex reports as well as pulling from multiple sources. And that's one area that we hear a lot. I think Davis has showed some tips on how you can overcome those. And we're going to ask about the future webinars where maybe we dig down deeper into some of these areas right here. But everybody, thanks for voting. And Davis, back to you.
Yep, thank you, Rob. Just a couple more reports to get through here before the hour escapes us. Fourth report is utilizing some graphing and charting features. These can be used to illustrate different data trends. Very nice idea to do it where a visual graph or chart, such as a bar graph or a line graph, pie chart, etc., is needed to support that data set. So let me just show you a good example of a nice graphing and charting report within Crystal. I run my cross-reference search, prompting me for a location, prompting me for a date range. Play elevator music, Jeopardy tune again. And you can see in this particular report, I've got a nice graphical summary of a couple different things going on at this particular sampling event. I've got a dissolved oxygen profile here, profiling the oxygen concentrations at various depths in a reservoir. I've got an iron manganese profile that's profiling the iron and manganese concentrations at various depths. And then I've got like an algae count graph here in a bar type graph. Don't want you to be so concerned necessarily with the data that I have on there, but what I really want you to take on from this is the graphical features within Crystal is somewhat nice in terms of being able to display things that you want to display within your lab. How do I actually get these graphs to work? Real quick. Basically, within the report designer itself, the only thing you have to do is click on this insert chart icon here that's in your toolbar at the top of the screen. When you do that, you can click and drag your chart area in the real estate that you want it to display. In this particular case, I've highlighted my first chart in this particular report. I can right-click on that chart, go into Chart Expert, and within these 6 tabs at the top of this Chart Expert, I can essentially make anything I want to happen with this chart. Here's where I'm telling it I want a line chart here on the Data tab. This is where I'm telling it, probably the most important part of this is getting this Data tab right. Here I'm telling it I want to chart on the change of a sample description and an analysis code. And notice how I have an S by these entries. What this means is if I highlight that particular field and I hit order, it is saying that I want to chart these analysis codes in a specified order. And my specified order would be put the DO analysis code or dissolved oxygen analysis code first and my temperature analysis code second. So in a way, I can actually take my data and actually filter it and specify to only display what I want it to display. Another one of the many questions I get from users is, well, I'm exporting all of my data out of LabWorks, but I only want to show information for 1 or 2 analysis codes. It spits out everything. I don't want everything. You handle that in Crystal with the filtering and sorting functionality. So in this particular case, I want it sorted based on a change of analysis code, but I only want it to display DO and temp in that particular order. So again, not much more to show you here, just a very nice graphical charting report that can be utilized in Crystal within your laboratory. So in summary on this one, use this insert graph feature to perform basic graphing operations within Crystal. Think about how other data sets in your laboratory can be graphed for improved management. Maybe you want to graph things by maybe like sample turnaround time, or maybe how many analysis did you do on this sample point during this month. Workload evaluation, how many analysis is this particular group doing versus this particular group. So there's a lot of managerial type implications that you can do as it relates to the Crystal charting feature. And then a tip I put here really has nothing to do with Crystal, but a lot of people are not comfortable with that Crystal charting and graphing features, but they're really comfortable with charting in Excel. If you want to go that route, use Crystal to export the data and format it in a manner that can be easily exported to Crystal to Excel, such that your Excel charting functions can pick up the data that you're exporting from Crystal. Okay, guys, final report. Summary and count type report. This is just one report that just kind of illustrates multiple strategies that we talked about in this webinar. It kind of internalizes some calculations within crosstabs, etc. When you start thinking about more advanced reports, kind of incorporating all the features that we kind of talked about today, this kind of wraps it all up at once. So I'm going to launch this summary and count report. Again, it's a data export report. I'm going to again run a cross-reference search. Found a little bit too many samples there, 5277. As you all know, if I try to load 5,000 samples, that's not going to happen very quickly. So let me run this cross-reference search again. Much better. Load up these samples. So this is in particular, this is a water distribution compliance report. Basically, for those of you who have to follow things like total coliform rule, where you actually have to monitor every address or every sample in your water distribution system, monitor what type of chlorine residual you may have, and monitor all of your bacteriological results. This is a nice report to actually make that happen. So you can see the crosstab features right off the bat, my rows and column formats here. But really what makes this hum for compliance purposes is at the very end of the report, I've got a monthly disinfection average calculation and a total number of samples taken. This is doing the count and averaging features again. So if I look at my monthly disinfection average on my design criteria and I go into change summary operation, you can see once again that I'm getting the average of all of my data set for this particular report. If I look at the counting functions, I'm counting the total number of samples that were collected. So these are two big pieces of information that are used for compliance purposes for this report. And these counting and these averaging functions are kind of used within the crosstab design feature itself. Another aspect of this design crosstab report, again, if I right-click and do crosstab expert, is I'm actually doing filtering and sorting within the crosstab itself. So if you notice, I've got my report to display the analysis name. If I click on group options, again, I have my analysis name set to display in specified order. And my specified order is simply these three particular analysis codes: chlorine, total coliform, and E. coli. So even though in my samples I've exported a very huge data set, I've got the report filtering and only showing 3 different analysis codes for this report. So again, another example of how Crystal is really taking my data, displaying it in a way that I want to display it, and filtering it, grouping it, sorting it, aggregating it exactly like I want it to display. So again, distribution summary report showing the count functionality. So really, the summary of this report, use the count summary operation to achieve various management report objectives. I mean, again, you can do count per sample point, count per program, count for any criteria that you want to do. If it's in your database, you can count. You can count for the whole report. You can count on certain sections. All of it is at your disposal. You can use the crosstabs for tabular-based reports that can be filtered for only select analysis codes or other criteria. And really, the tip here to take home is really this last report. I'm just combining advanced design features within one element to achieve really advanced reporting needs. So guys, let's move into the summary. Again, thank you for being with me today. I know I've covered a lot of information really fast. We could take one of these reports and again spend several hours on it, but I really wanted to throw as much out there to you as possible to show you what's out there, kind of working backwards from a completed report. Again, on further webinars, we can really dive down to the report design a little bit more specific. But here really in summary, although there are multiple ways to report in LabWorks, Crystal provides the most powerful options to accomplish your complete reporting objectives. This does come at a cost. As you can see here, report design expertise is required to customize your own reports, or you can obtain services to have someone do them for you if you don't have the expertise in-house. And again, as I mentioned earlier, consider these reports as tools of their own merit, but more importantly, think about how the design elements within each of these reports can be extended to whatever you may want in your laboratory. And a tip here, and what I always found when I was learning Crystal, is find existing reports. There are several canned reports within your Crystal folder in your LW data folder that come with your LabWorks installation. Load those up and play with them. You're not going to hurt anything. Play around with some of these features that we talked about today and try to do a design element that really meets your particular needs. And you know, before long, you'll be your own expert on Crystal reports. So with that said, I do want to talk a little bit about our future LabWorks webinars. We do plan on continuing these. Up next, we're going to do one on calculations, how to extend those calculations to let LabWorks do the work. We also have some ideas of maybe integrating LabWorks to your existing system, some on electronic data deliverables, and maybe some on configuring QC to optimize that regulatory reporting. So I think with that said, we have a final poll question, Rob.
We do. We'd like to actually get your input on this. These are some of our ideas, but please go ahead and make some selections here about what you'd like to see in future webinars. If there's something that is not on here, you could certainly email that to us directly. But before we get into questions, take a minute to go ahead and make your selections, and then we'll open up the questions for everybody. Okay, looks like we're just about getting wrapped up with that. Give it another second. Okay, it looks like the process scheduler continues to be a popular one. I think we had a similar poll up for our last webinar, and process scheduler was high on the list as well. So we'll probably be scheduling one for that, as well as electronic data deliverable. So great, thanks everybody for voting. Before we open up for questions, just a few things. This was being recorded today, so we will be sending out the link for it. And if you weren't able to attend our first one that we had back before the holidays, let us know and we can send that out. That webinar was optimizing your LabWorks system. Of course, if there's any other comments or suggestions or something you'd like to see, don't hesitate to email us at that email there, and you can call us directly at that extension. So before we close out today, we have a few more minutes. If there's any questions, if you want to, you can raise your virtual hand there on your dashboard. I'll unmute you, and you can ask your question directly to Davis. We did have a few questions, Davis, that came in via the question panel. So if there's no direct questions, I'll start with those. All right, well, people are thinking. A couple of them here, Davis. First one is, says, you've talked a lot about Crystal Reports as the reporting tool. Does LabWorks use any other type of reporting tool, or is there an option to use any other ones other than Crystal?
Yes, historically, there's Word reporting, there's Access reporting, there's Excel reporting, where you're basically dumping your data into your Word, Access, or Excel, and using the inherent functionality within those particular Microsoft programs. There's also some internal reporting mechanisms within LabWorks. Another one of the popular ones is the MOR, or the monthly operating report. That is simply an export vehicle into Excel as well. So you can almost look at that one as an Excel type reporting. So yes, I mean, there are interfaces for Word, Access, and Excel in addition to Crystal. Crystal is just the newer technology. It allows a lot more possibilities. But again, there is a learning curve there. But those would be your four main types of reporting within LabWorks.
Okay, great. Thanks. Second question, how is the report header different from the page header?
Yeah, so you've got typically 5 sections on that report. You've got a report header, a page header, a detail section, a report footer, and a page footer. If you want an item to display on every page of the report, you drop that item into the page header or the page footer. If you want that item to only show up on the first or last page of the report, you put it in the report header or the report footer. So a common strategy may be like to put your company logo and a main title or a main header in the report footer, but you don't necessarily, or excuse me, in the report header, but you don't necessarily repeat that on every single page of the report. In that case, you would put those items in the page header and the page footer. So that kind of is the difference between those two.
Okay, next one. Is there a way to get more info about defining variables and conditional highlighting? Maybe a tutorial or some place to go to get some information on that? That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, within Crystal itself, there's the help functions within Crystal, but depending on what version of LabWorks you had, within the installation files, there was a Crystal report manual that was placed in some of those files. That was some tutorials on how to make some of this stuff happen. Look in your installation folder, on your LWEXE folder on the server, to see if those PDF documents, like your installation manual, Crystal report manual, if you have any of those. If you do not, send us an email to that address, and I'll be happy to send you a copy of a PDF copy of a Crystal report training manual.
Okay, thanks, Davis. That was all the questions that were submitted. Anybody have any other questions before we close out today? Okay, well, folks, thanks so much for attending. We do appreciate it. Look for future emails from us on upcoming webinars. Our next one on calculations, extended calculations, will be in early spring, and we'll be sending out an email to that in the upcoming weeks. And we look forward to seeing everybody then. Have a great day. Thank you.